Hey friends, hope everybody's doing well. Got a pretty simple scene for us today. So this is a rural desert Arizona scene. So we've just got this stand of trees here, and then we've got some houses in the background, and then we've got this ditch that comes along to the foreground, and then a pretty basic blue sky. And I like this scene because it's simple. There's a very strong shape between the trees and the shadows of the houses. And that's really just about it. It's going to be simple but effective and relatively straightforward to paint, hopefully. So we're just going to jump right into it. As always, I've got my value study. Just breaking the scene into 3 values, light, middle, and dark. And the middle value is one big connected shape, basically. There's a few patches like this area here, which is disconnected, but it's implied that everything is connected. And I've made a few decisions with this reference photo. I've decided to darken up the shadow side of this bank a little more than it is in the photo. And the same with this shadow side of the bank. I wanted to emphasize that a little more, make the foreground a little more interesting, add some more directional lines leading your eye to right about there. You'll notice that all the lines point to that point, and that's called your vanishing point. So, again, very basic, very simple, very straightforward. I enjoy painting stands of trees and fields. It's one of my favorite things to paint. Something about it is just very satisfying to me. I also like the interface of the natural world and the man-made world with the houses and the drainage canals out here in this rural area of Arizona. So, I'm going to be painting on block today. I usually paint on paper, but today I'm going to be painting on this Arches block. This is the block I usually use to paint my value studies, but today I figured let's try to paint on it. It's a little bit smaller scale, 9 by 10. And I'm going to still wet the paper down. Obviously I won't be wetting both sides of this because it's a block, and a block is just a bunch of sheets of watercolor glued together. It's a little more convenient. It's really good for plein air, painting outside. And you don't have to worry about wetting both sides. It holds a lot of water, and it stays relatively flat. So we're going to take our sponge and just get this nice and wet. Squeeze out that water, or maybe just use the other side of the sponge that's already dry, and kind of sop up the excess water. Doesn't need to be soaking wet. And I think that will do it. Make sure we're all in frame. Looks like we are. So I'll have the value study right there, and then the reference photo right there. You can kind of see how I broke it down into a value study from the photo, and then you'll be able to look at both of those as I paint. You can kind of watch how I'm using both of these to turn this into a painting. And you can kind of see my thought processes going on. So let's get a sky mixture going on. Take my big old quill brush. Got my paper towel here for cleaning my brush off, and then I got this rag here for kind of getting rid of some of that excess water, controlling the wetness on my brush. We're going to do something a little different than I do with skies. I think I'm going to go more heavy on the cobalt blue. Still going to mix in some cerulean like I always do, but I want the top part of the sky to be darker than I usually have it. And cobalt blue will help me get that richer, darker blue. And we're still going to have that cobalt turquoise light towards the horizon, you can see that the shade of blue becomes more turquoise as it gets towards the horizon. There's a very simple sky, and with simple blue skies like this, my goal is to always create as smooth of a gradient as I can. Having the paper wet like this will help with that, and also having a brush that holds a lot of water will help. And having your colors pre-mixed on this big palette will help too. So just starting at the top and working down. Sometimes I'll start down and work up, but it usually feels more natural for me to start at the top for whatever reason. I'm going to go a little more intense with the mixture, I think. Also, I'm trying to keep my brush parallel to the paper, or flat, I guess, as I go across. We're going to paint right through these trees, because they will be a lot darker than the sky. We'll talk more about these trees when I start painting them. They're a very interesting kind of tree. Tree that can be found all over the southwestern United States. And I'll kind of move back up into the paint as I come down to blend things together and get that gradient a little more smooth. Right on down to the bottom of the horizon. And we're going to leave it just like that, nice and easy, nice and fast. It's going to be a fast, easy painting today. Now, continuing with this first wash, which is all about the lightest colors of your painting. Let's clear off some paint here from the palette. These houses are a nice kind of salmon pinkish color, so I'm just going to take a little bit of that red. Clean that brush off a little better. I'm just going to take the most faint light wash of this red and drop it in here. Just kind of tinting the color of these houses a little bit. Very subtle. Now we're going to grab some warm color for the ground area. It's that burnt umber. Just start throwing that around on the ground. Leaving this area white for now because I'm going to paint some greens right here to indicate some grass. Mix it into that blue here and there to get a more gray color going on. There's going to be some yellow here for that dead grass. Yellow ochre is going to be good for that. That's a little too vibrant. Mix it into some of that blue to dull it down. Well, maybe I will go more vibrant. What the heck, why not? I've been more drawn to No pun intended, even though this is a painting. But it starts out as a drawing. I've been more drawn to lately using subtler, earthier tones in my works for some reason. And this is all going to fade quite a bit when it dries, so it won't actually end up being that vibrant. Take some cobalt blue, mix it into that yellow ochre. I could also just mix yellow ochre into this blue that's already on the palette. Yellow ochre gives you a nice kind of dull, more dusty green, which is kind of the vibe I'm going for, kind of a dusty desert town, rural dusty Arizona town. This is just outside of Coolidge, Arizona, about 45 minutes southeast of Arizona, between Arizona and Tucson, something like that, in the middle of nowhere. I was out here for work and snuck away to take some pictures. I love rural scenes like this. So, paint's going to bleed a little bit. We're going to let this paper dry. I want the paper to be basically completely dry because I need those sharp edges and textures for the trees. So, I'll let this dry and I'll be right back. Alright, paper is nice and dry. Dry enough anyway. So we're just going to start dropping in these trees. I'm going to mix up a darker mixture of that dusty, earthy green. Try to get a nice big puddle going on this palette. Start with these trees right here. I do like how this dark foliage makes this sharp line over this patch of ground right here. It's very satisfying. And since I've already done a value study, I know almost exactly how I'm going to paint this. There's no guesswork involved because I've already painted it once. I know right where all the middle values are going. I know how they all connect to each other. I've taken the guesswork out of it. Makes watercolor a lot less stressful. It can be a very stressful and intense medium to figure out. And this helps with that a lot. Just knowing what you're doing before you actually start your painting, already having painted it once. I'm just loosely indicating the shape of this little clump of trees with really quick kind of flicks, trying to vary my brush strokes, change it up as I go. I'll come in with this liner brush and add some of those smaller branches. Not going to go too crazy with detail on the background tree, but I want some detail. And you'll notice that to paint the branches, I'm still just using that same green color. I'm not dipping into any brown or anything because it's so far back that your eye's not going to really notice. And honestly, if I were to be really fussy with the color of the tiny branches on this really distant tree, it would kind of mess with the scene. It wouldn't look right. It would look strange. And we'll leave that as is for now. we're going to go right into the shadow side of this house, which I'm going to just paint in some of this cobalt blue. Mix in some of that burnt umber to get a gray color going on. More blue. Just going back and forth until the color looks right. So the shape of this clump of trees goes right into the shadow side of the house. And then this shadow under the eave of the house will go right into this main clump of trees. There's a little shadow on the ground here too, which goes down into this ditch. Since I've already got this color on my brush, I'm just dropping it in. That goes up into the trees, so we will paint these trees, which are salt cedars. As I was saying before, it's a very interesting tree. For one thing, it's not from here. It's an invasive species. They are native to Europe and Asia. I believe they were brought here by early Western settlers for irrigation, or not irrigation, but erosion control. I'm not sure exactly when that happened. And also as an ornamental plant, because they are pretty in their strange way. They've got these feathery little leaves. They've got these beautiful purple blossoms that kind of cascade down. But they are invasive to this area and cause quite a bit of issues for the local ecosystems. They tend to suck up all the water. And the way they get their name salt cedar is because they are adapted to live in salty, poor quality soil, and the way they deal with that is by extruding the salt through their leaves, I think it is, and then that salt just falls to the ground and nothing can grow around the tree because the ground is now covered in salt. And unless you're a plant adapted to that environment, you're not going to survive. So they cause issues on several different fronts. But they are still a part of our landscape. I've been seeing them my whole life. I always thought that they were a weird kind of pine tree growing up, but they are in fact a cedar. So I'm constantly dipping back into my paint and changing up the green, varying it, making it different. Adding more blue here, more yellow there. You don't want it to be one massive shade of the same kind of green. It won't look natural that way. This paper does dry very fast, so I'm having to stay on top of that to keep this as one clean wash where all of the edges are connected and touching while they're still wet. That's what I want. That's how you get your painting to look fresh and spontaneous. So this is forcing me to paint faster than I normally would. This feels more like plein air painting, the way I'm doing it, painting outside, which I've only done a few times. It's a very interesting experience. You're forced to make really quick decisions because the light's changing all the time. Everything is changing. Nothing is staying still. So you've got to be fast and decisive. And painting on paper that dries really quickly is forcing me to do the same. It's good to put yourself in those kinds of situations every now and then to keep things fresh and to push your abilities and drop your brush. I'm going to become famous on YouTube for always being the artist that drops my brush in every video. You would think I'd be better at holding on to stick-like objects because I'm a drummer. Although I drop my stick sometimes as a drummer, so, you know, for what that's worth. You'll notice that I'm leaving gaps in the foliage. You don't want to paint it as just one massive thing. Leave a few gaps here and there. It makes it look more natural, more like an actual tree would look. Because a tree isn't actually a solid thing. It's made up of little leaves or branches or needles, and there's a lot of space in there. So this is a way that you can indicate that. It's looking pretty good. And, well, while this is still damp, I'm going to start dropping in some of those darks, because I want there to be some wet into wet happening in the canopy of the tree. While it's still damp, it makes this, do you see how it makes the shape a little softer? I find that my trees look a lot more realistic if I start adding darks while they're still damp. And this is just a really blue, heavy gray. It's not actually green. It doesn't have to be a darker green. It can just be a cool, dark color. Value study is coming in really handy again because I know where my darks are going. I don't have to spend too much time looking back and forth. I can just kind of go. That shadow is going to be very dark, so I'll just darken that up now. Nice cool shadow for the interior of this stand of salt cedars. I just really love painting trees. They have so much character. They almost have a personality. My next painting might be actually a study of a palm tree, which are always extremely intricate and intense to paint, but they're very satisfying. So stick around if you're interested in that sort of thing. I'm trying to hurry before this edge is dry because I need this to connect to the shadow of that house. So I'm trying to go fast. Painting around some of these clumps that are sticking out away from the main body of the tree as I move over this way, because the light is coming from the right up and to the right, as you can see by this shadow. It's an early-ish morning scene. Love a scene with strong shadows. Strong shadows and high contrast is my favorite thing. Yeah, see how blue that is? I really enjoy making vibrant shadows. They don't just have to be dull gray. You can add some life and interest to them. And I think we're just about able to paint that shadow of the house. I'm going to dip into a slightly more diluted mixture of the same gray color, because this is middle value right here. This isn't dark, maybe a little darker than that. Something like that, yeah. Just barely made it in time, so we connected that into the shape of this tree. So you can see how the shape is all connected from here, this tree to the house, to the shadow, to this stand of trees over to the shadow of this house, and on and on. Having that one big shape across your whole scene gives the viewer's eye something to lock onto. And it helps it read very well if you're looking at the painting up on a wall. It's simple and it's powerful. And once again, this is all thanks to my value study that I'm able to be so confident in what the shape is going to be. Value studies are painting savers. My painting game just leveled up exponentially the day I started doing value studies, because I didn't used to do them. Didn't think I needed to. And then I just tried it one day and was completely shocked by how much better my painting was immediately. Okay, we're going to drop in just some texture for this grass area. I dip into some green on the palette. And this will help pop the light side of this house too by having this darker grass underneath it. Always looking for areas of contrast in my scenes. So this is still wet enough that we can go ahead and add some shadow to that bank. This is back to middle value. Usually I just paint all the middle value and then go into the dark, but like I said, sometimes it's better to start adding darks when certain areas are still wet or damp. So there's a little area at the top of the bank that's lit. I'm trying to preserve that. I'm going to do some dry brush as the bank comes more forward, indicating some of the texture going on there. Looking at my value study, I added some texture on the path or the road here. Just some like tire marks or something. And you can take your finger and kind of smudge things, just kind of add some grit to it. We'll make this a little warmer. Start adding some textures on this bank here. And I don't really think I'm going to have to do much more to this tree, if anything at all. It looks pretty done to me, which is always satisfying, getting it right the first time. Does not always happen, but the more practice you have, the more easily that you can just drop things in the first time and it's the right value. It Takes a lot of practice to get there, though. So don't be discouraged if you're not quite at that level yet. I still have to go back and rework things all the time. Just darkening up some areas of this bank a little bit more. Yeah, and I have not spent very much time on this painting at all. It's been nice and fast, easy. I wanted to do something easy that I didn't have to think too much about today. I had to do too much thinking at work today, so I needed to not think about anything while painting. Some scenes require a lot more thinking and concentration, but this one I'm just kind of going and having fun. I'm trying to get at the point where almost any scene I do has that energy, that carefree, loose, almost like a sketch. I'm just playing with textures and seeing what goes on. Get back into that yellow ochre. We'll just add some texture to this area of dry grass. So this is also a good time to talk about something that I really struggled with when I was first starting to paint, which was, what do you paint? What do you even paint? Because I was watching YouTube videos, much like the one I'm making right now, about how to paint, the techniques, but I just wasn't understanding what to paint, and then I just started taking pictures of things that looked interesting as I was out and about, and I started trying to look at the world in terms of interesting shapes and light and shadow instead of focusing on what the thing itself was. And I found that really helped to broaden my perception of what could be something that I would paint. And so I'm always, constantly, all the time, whenever I'm out, in the back of my mind, I'm looking for scenes, for reference photos. At first you have to be a little intentional with how you do that. You have to do it consciously, but after a while it becomes so second nature that you just automatically do it. And I am definitely to that point now. I almost see the world in terms of compositions, and I'm always taking reference photos. Always, all the time. Wherever I am. So I'm never running out of things to paint. It can be the most mundane thing in the world, like this. This is just some random trees in this rural neighborhood, but I was driving down the road. I happened to look down the road and saw some really interesting light and shadow going on, so I drove down there and took this picture, and now I've got a painting. And these are almost always my favorite kinds of paintings, are the ones that I just happen to see something interesting on the side of the road and stop to take a picture. And they almost always involve trees or water or both. This house needs a window that I forgot about. Some random stuff going on. Maybe a few more details along the periphery of the canopy. Even though there's none in the photo, I might scratch out a few branches with the edge of my fingernail. Just very... You don't have to press too hard. And in fact, if you have to press really hard, then your paint is too dry and you missed your chance. You gotta time it right for scratching. It's gotta be just the right amount of dry, but not too dry and not too wet. Just one of those things that you have to develop an instinct for over time. Not going to go crazy, just scratching out a few branches here and there to add a little more interest. And even though there's none in the photo, I decided that my trees needed branches. So these are things that you can do in a painting. You can make those kinds of decisions. You don't have to copy the reference photo exactly. Make it your own world, your own version of the world. There's some dark windows in the house right here. Just makes it look a little more like a house. This is kind of an Adobe style house, very, very common out here. Got those kind of wood, giant wood, what are they called, beams that go through the middle of the house that stick out the side like that. Very iconic of the Adobe style. Yeah. And you know, I might just add some textures of rocks and stuff here and there. Into the shadow side of this bank. Not too much, just a few here and there, exactly like I have in my reference photo. Maybe a little more detailed than that, or sorry, like I have in my value study. Again, this is something I've already planned ahead of time, and looking at my value study reminded me, oh yeah, I need to add a little more texture to the road with my darks. Just makes things a little more interesting. And then I'm probably going to do a little bit of tapping once I'm done with this. My goal with all of my paintings is to be loose and free and expressive. I want it to look more like a spontaneous sketch than a painting that I've slaved over for hours and hours, if that makes sense. I want it to look like a painting, but one that has sketch energy. Sketchy vibes, but the good kind of sketchy. Yeah, and since this paper has a little bit of texture to it, I can easily drag my finger or my brush across, and the texture of the paper itself becomes the texture of the ground. So let's do some tapping just here and there. Just giving it a little more gritty texture. Holding my holding my brush very close to the paper. Can you tell it's been a long day? It's been a long day. So that it doesn't splatter everywhere. I think I'm really only going to do that on the shadow side of this bank. You'll also notice that in the reference photo there's a bit of a road right here, but I decided to leave that out. Didn't think this scene needed a road. You know, I'm not going to do almost anything else to this. It's almost done. But as always, you know what I'm going to do now. You already know. Throw some birds in the sky. Because of course I am. Now the question is, where in the sky are the birds going to go? Maybe a few over here. Just a few this time. I think I'm not going to go overboard. I just want there to be a little more activity in the sky. So I'm being very careful where I put the birds, but I'm trying to make it look spontaneous. And I'll kind of squiggle around here and there. It's literally just like little V shapes, like how a preschooler would draw a bird. That's all I'm doing. But the way I'm positioning those shapes is what's making it look a little more realistic. I'm trying to make it kind of random. I've also ended up doing this kind of thing on accident lately where I'm making it look like there's a flock of birds flying toward you from the distance. And the way you can do that is by making the shapes smaller as they recede. Kind of like that. And then closer together, like this. See? That makes it look like they're flying towards you and that the shape is expanding as it comes close to you. Something I accidentally started doing one day, and I thought, wow, that looks really cool. I'm going to keep doing that. Yeah, believe it or not, this painting is already done. This is what I love about watercolor. You can just, if you want to, you can have an entire painting done in 45 minutes. You don't have to sit here slaving away for days on end on a really precise piece. I mean, unless you want to. If you want to do that, that's totally fine. But I do not. I want to be done with it, move on to the next thing, have it be quick, easy, expressive, loose, all the things we talked about. So with that being said, I hope to see you on the next video. I hope you learned something in this video, and thank you very much for watching.